Webinar is about loading OS MasterMap Topography data into ArcGIS using the UK data loader. And I've been joined, my name's Ian Bennett from Audit Survey, and I've been joined by Peter McDade from ESRI UK, who heads their data in UK data localization team at ESRI. The aim of the webinar is to help you learn about how you can use ESRI's UK data loader for converting the OS MasterMap Topography layer, including how you apply change only update and looking at styling. This is something new because UK data loader is by ESRI as a way of managing Audit Survey data and is replaced in the Audit Survey Productivity Suite. Sorry, the ESRI Productivity Suite. So before we get started, we've got some poll questions for you. So if we could launch our poll questions, please. We've got sort of 6 questions, just so we can understand. You hit launch, don't you? So the first poll question should be on the screen now. So a quick list: yes, no. Do you already use ESRI software? So that's brilliant. Thank you very much for your responses. The majority of you are already familiar with ESRI software then. So we'll move on to the second one, and that's just to find out whether you use OS MasterMap Topography layer. So have you downloaded the data before? So it looks like the majority of you have. For those of you who haven't and may not be familiar with it, please do feel free to come back to me at the end of the webinar and ask me further questions outside of the webinar if there is information you need. So the next question, just so we can understand how many of you are already using the Productivity Suite to translate data from ESRI. So thank you very much for those responses. It seems that the majority of you are. There's quite a few of you though who aren't. The next question really is, I mean, I don't know how many of you that aren't using Productivity Suite have we already moved to UK data loader, but we'd be interested to know who's already using it. So just wait for the final few responses to come in. So those of you who responded, 60% of you aren't using UK data loader. Hopefully today we'll give you an introduction to UK data loader, and we'll help you to move forward to that when Pete starts to talk about that later. 2 more questions to go. Sorry, it's a bit of a question marathon. Do you apply change only update to your data, or are you just taking a full supply? So it looks like the majority of you all know that this one's swinging back. So this one is a 50-50 split actually on using change only update. So half of you are and half of you aren't, which is quite an interesting response. Thank you for that. And the final question around the styling from GitHub. I hope you're all aware of this. There's a link later in the webinar, but how many are using the styling that's available on GitHub? I'm just waiting for a few more responses to come in. Most of you responded, so thank you very much. It seems like the majority of you aren't using the styling on GitHub. If you're not aware of that, we will touch on that a bit later. And I know Pete is going to show you how that styling can be applied using the tools that ESRI have created. So thank you very much for your responses. If I move on now, I've gone backwards. So what are we going to learn today during the webinar? This webinar is about how you use the UK data loader from ESRI to load OS MasterMap Topography data into the ESRI platform. So that's into ArcGIS Pro, ArcMap, ArcGIS Online, by getting the data into a database. And Pete will go into more detail about that. And then he'll talk about how you can apply change to your data, and then how you can style the data. So just to frame the data, and for those who are not aware, the Icemass Spectacular layer is the most detailed and accurate view of Great Britain's landscape. It's the data that we're collecting either using survey or remote sensing to show you buildings and fields, fences, and the detail of the information that's underpinning a lot of processes that you obviously are going through. Change only update is a means, instead of having to update your entire data holding every time, and if you've got quite a big data holding, it's quite a slow process, by only changing those features that are new or have changed, and then departed features are those features that are removed from the data and can be deleted. And this is all in one file with a feature validation file, which you can use to check that you've got the right features and you've successfully been able to apply those to your database. I've mentioned Starling already, and GitHub. Ordnance Survey has a GitHub repository, and that contains SLD files, QML files, layer files for most Ordnance Survey data. And you can see there from the screen, you can go on there and look at those repositories. So it's not just topography for layer, it's zoom stack, it's vector map local, it's highways. There's a lot of information on there, and that's where we're putting stuff that we've created and we feel will be helpful for you as our users. So now it's over to Pete to talk about the UK data loader. So if I just give you the control of the mouse, Pete.
Yep, thank you, Ian. Okay, so I'm just going to talk very quickly about the UK data loader and what it is. As hopefully the majority of you are aware, particularly the ones who use Productivity Suite, that is being retired at the end of this year, and we've replaced the data loading functions of that with the UK data loader. It's been rewritten in ArcGIS Pro, and it takes advantage of the data interoperability extension, which I'll come to in just a moment. What we've done is we've built it to focus on OS data sets at this point in time. So it's OS highways, address space, VML, and the MasterMap topography layer. It's an ArcGIS toolbox, so that makes it easy to deploy. What you need to do is you just need to essentially unzip that toolbox and its folders into an area you can browse to, and then you can just point directly at the toolbox. That means that there's no longer any need to install new software, going through getting administration passwords or getting your IT to actually install software for you. You can just take the latest version of the toolbox and put that into your own area that you can access. So it should hopefully make it a lot easier for people to keep up to date. Just go back. So as I said, it's built using out-of-the-box technologies, as we would term them. So we use the data interoperability extension, which under the covers is the FME Engine, which some of you may be aware of. Essentially, that is a tool which is designed primarily to translate data from one form into another and allows you to manipulate that data as you're loading it. We've wrapped that tool in Python. That allows us to just manage the running of the tool. So because often with MasterMap data, you will be processing large numbers of files, we've built it in such a way that it batches those together under the covers and allows us to manage the load on your machine as we're actually loading the data. So loading them a few batches of files at a time. And that also allows us to handle any issues that arise, allowing us to roll back any changes or restart one of the processes if for some reason you lose something like network connection or something like that. Because we built it in these out-of-the-box technologies rather than as a completely custom application, it means that it's much easier for us to support. Python is a very understood program language throughout the company and throughout the industry. And because data interoperability uses FME, we also have the support of safe software if we come across any issues or need any advice on how to make things run a little bit smoother. So when it comes to MasterMap Topography layer, the loader is very simple. I'm not going to go through and show you how it works because it is literally a case of you point to the location of where your files are. So you select the folder where all your files are stored and you select the location you want to load it into. So whether it's a file geodatabase or an enterprise geodatabase, you just select the connection to that. You can prefix the data. So in that screenshot, you can see I've prefixed it as OSMM underscore. That just allows me to identify those feature class quickly. It would allow you to load multiple loads of the data if you have different epochs or something like that that you want to look at. And it just asks you where you want a log file. So it's a very simple, straightforward process that will then load all the GML files, push them out and create all of the feature classes that you need based on the data that's in there. There is also a set of tables which are created which detail the changes that have been made to any of those feature classes. The COU tool is identical in terms of how you actually use it. You just point to the folder where you have all of your change files. You tell it where your current data is, and then it will just identify the correct feature classes to upload and update, and it will just run through there. So we try to keep it as simple as possible, not overcomplicate things. We will only add things to the UI as and when they become necessary. So if we decide there's extra functionality or extra options that you want, we will add those in there. Anybody who's seen the way the OS Highways loader tool has evolved over the last year and a half will see that we have added more functions and more UI as and when necessary. But the actual process itself is very, very straightforward. It will load the data as raw data into your geodatabase, and then you need to style the data. So we've designed the UK data loader to work with the styling that the Ordnance Survey have produced on GitHub. So the way that those style files work, you have the style file, you have a font, and it's based upon some style codes and descriptions which need to be calculated against the underlying data that you have. They have some scripts in GitHub which allow you to calculate those style codes and descriptions, but we've built into the UK data loader for it to automatically add those for you. So whenever it loads the data, there are 2 extra columns of style code and description which we will pre-populate as we're loading the data. You can use the style files in ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro. I'm showing you on the screen there, ArcGIS Pro. When you drag the layer file into the map, it will just show up with the red exclamation mark, which means that it doesn't know where the data source is. As you can see, we're literally just clicking on the red exclamation mark, pointing to the data, and then it will just load it in. So you do this once, you can then save your project or your map, and that's it. Once you then update the data, then you can use it, and you just have their styles there. There are, I believe, 4 different styles that are available as well. So the standard style, which you can see there, and there's also a couple of others like the background style, which was the one that I think that was showing on Ian's screenshot earlier, and there's a couple of others like the outdoor one and the light one, just to give you a few options there. So one thing I would say when you're using the style files, considerations you have when we create the data and we load the data, use the UK data loader, we create an annotation feature class in the geodatabase, which is essentially a feature class that has all of the labeling in there, and inside the database it stores the styling in terms of the fonts, the sizes and those sorts of things, the orientation. Where possible, we would suggest you use the annotation feature class. We found it's much more reliable, much more performant in the majority of cases in terms of actually viewing the labels. If you use the one which is the cartographic text one, they will work, and the majority of the time everything will be fine, but you may find in certain places there are some overlaps of labels or things like that, just because of the nature of the data and the nature of the way the styling is set up. So the takeaway is, if possible, use the annotation feature class. What you also need to do is set the reference scale. This is something that we have had a fair few support calls about. In the GitHub repository, in their guide on how to use the style sheets, it does tell you what reference scale to use for the various data sets. It's different depending on whether you're using MasterMap, VML, those sorts of things. If you just read through the style guide, find what the reference scale is and make sure you set that at the map level. It will make sure that symbols and labeling and everything is displayed at the right size and in the right place. Like I say, that is something that has come up from people before. There's not a huge amount more to say in terms of what we're actually the tool does. It does what it needs to. It takes the data, it loads it for you, and with the styling, it means that you can pick it up throughout the platform, and you can view it with the right symbology and the labels are showing in the correct places. As we're going through with the UK Data Loader, we are changing things based upon your feedback. So I think that it's important that we get your feedback and make sure that we add things in there that you're looking for. A couple of things that we are going to pick up in future updates is we're going to start looking at support for Postgres. The productivity suite didn't support loading into Postgres, and UK Data Loader doesn't currently, but we have had requests from a few people for us to look into that. So we will be looking into that for a future release and making sure that that loads all correctly for you. Previously, Productivity Suite created a line feature class for the text, which allowed people to label the lines as opposed to labeling it around a point. We changed that in the UK Data Loader because we wanted to remain more true to how the data is actually delivered. So the labels are delivered and annotation are delivered as points with the rotation around those points and things. We have over probably the last 6 months to a year had a little bit of feedback from people that in certain situations the line features were much more useful. We're going to have a look into that. Technically, it's quite a challenging thing for us to do, but based upon feedback, it is something that's worth looking at. So we'll start looking at that and seeing what we can do in terms of producing that for you. We also are aware we want to increase the performance of it. The performance in majority of the cases is comparable or slightly faster than Productivity Suite in our testing, and certainly majority of the feedback we've had from users. There are some things that we can look at in terms of increasing the performance of the code, the loading. So we're looking at sort of parallelization of some of the loading. Now, that's the ability for us to do that has only come in more recent versions of ArcGIS Pro. So we're going to wait until the older versions are out of support so that hopefully everybody's moved to the more recent versions before we add that in. What we want to avoid is having multiple versions of the tool out there depending on which version of ArcGIS Pro you're using. We're trying to keep this as simple for you as possible, having a simple toolbox that you know you can load in any supported version of ArcGIS Pro and you can use. I think the majority of what we need to think about is what you need us to do at this point. So we're keen to get some feedback from you as to the sorts of things that you need. So are there things you do with the data after you've loaded it? Are there processes that you always run once you've got the data in your database? If you're doing something with it, it's likely there are many other people doing the same thing after they've loaded the data. So we'd be very keen to understand what those things are so that we can decide whether or not is that worth us doing for you, or is there other things we can do to help you with that in terms of when we load the data itself. So there are a few other things that have come up as well. So Ian mentioned the feature validation, so the option to use the file which talks about how many features there should be there and the counts and things like that. If you let us know, are those the sorts of things that you do? Is that something that you would want us to include as a separate tool or in the actual tools as well? That is something that came up the other week when I was talking to some of you about this. So those are the sorts of things that we're looking for from you. Now, it's not all just about loading the data into the ArcGIS platform. We also supply the data in other ways and support you in using it. So if you don't want to load the data yourself and spend the time keeping up to date, we can supply you a regular update of the processed data in file geodatabase format or other formats. If you talk to us about it, file geodatabase is the main one. That supply can be on a basis that suits you, so we can do an annual or quarterly, but let us know what you need and we can discuss the options there. The other thing we do is we offer it as a data as a service. So the majority of people will use MasterMap as a base map internally and sometimes in their external services. We produce a base map in ArcGIS Online, which has MasterMap in there, down to a scale of, it's cached to 1 to 500, but you can resample it further, so you can view it down to 1 to 250. We update that quarterly or 4 times a year. It's not always exactly quarterly because we usually wait for the right sets of data to be available to try and keep it as up to date as possible. But you can purchase access to that and you can then use that throughout the platform as well in ArcGIS Online, or you can pull it into your ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro. If you're just using the data as a base map, that is a very good way to remove the need for you to actually process the data yourselves and host it. We are looking at the moment at the vector tile services. So if you're not aware of what these are, it's a way of delivering base map content in a way which is lightweight and allows you to style it yourself. So rather than being stuck with the styles and the cartography that we provide you in the data as a service, you can take it and you can tweak that style to suit what it is you're using the data for. We have a beta available of that vector tile service, which contains MasterMap. We have some of our customers are looking at it at the moment. If you currently have access to our cached base map services through ArcGIS Online, you can get access to that if you just contact us through your customer success manager, and we can give you access to that so you can try it out and see what you feel. We'll be adding other data sets into that vector map, the vector tile service, over the next few weeks. We're looking at adding the vector map local data into there as well, with a view to going live very soon on that. To give you a comparison, it means that you can download the whole of MasterMap onto a mobile device, pretty much because of the size of the difference in size between the caches for a vector tile service and a cached base map. So that's mostly covering it. It is a very whistle-stop tour. It was mostly just to give you an idea of the tool, how simple it is, how you use the styling, and the other things that we have available for you. Appreciate you probably got questions. I think if on the next page, Ian has the contact details there. But would be interested to have your questions. Either you can obviously give them to myself now and I'll answer them if I can, or always contact me afterwards, and we'll be happy to hear from you and answer anything you have.